Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I am your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 92, and we are going to take a look at the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. But first of all, let me give a big shout out to my listeners because, as usual, you guys are awesome. So a big shout out to Virginia, Oklahoma, Texas, Pennsylvania, New York, California, in terms of countries, Denmark, Canada, the United Kingdom, and of course the United States. So thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. Let's go ahead and get started on this puppy here. Okay, so this is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. The long title is an act to regulate the marketing of economic poisons and devices and for other purposes. The acronyms, it's FIFRA, so F-I-F-R-A, is what this one is called. It was enacted by the 80th United States Congress. It was put into effect June 25th, 1947. It was signed into law by President Harry S. Truman on June 25th, 1947. Okay, so here we go on this one. This is an interesting one. I learned a lot. Hence, I'm not always a fan of pesticides. Even before reading this, I kind of think we overdo it on chemicals, my personal opinion. But let's see here. It says the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, also known as FIFRA, is a United States federal law that set up the basic U.S. system of pesticide regulation to protect applicators, consumers, and the environment. It is administered and regulated by the United States EPA. And it says a significant revision in 1972 by the Federal Environmental Pesticide Control Act, also known as FEPCA, and several others have expanded the EPA's present authority to oversee the sales and use of pesticides with emphasis on the preservation of human health and protection of the environment by, number one, strengthening the registration process by shifting the burden of proof to the chemical manufacturer. I agree with that because I think if you invent something or sell something, then that's on the company to prove what it does. It's not the government agency or it's not the responsibility of the consumer to prove the product does something. It needs to be the manufacturer. Number two, enforcing compliance against banned and unregistered products. And number three, promulgating the regulatory framework missing from the original law. Now, I kind of disagree with that last one because here's the thing. Whenever I look at laws differently, obviously, but laws to me, when they are passed, I don't view them as, oh, it's missing something from the beginning. I don't look at it that way. Whenever a law is written and passed, I look at it as, okay, it has everything it needs. If we need to make changes later down the road, then we will address that then. But the moment that it is passed and it starts to be implemented, to me, that law is complete. It's not missing anything. I think the problem in the United States, at least with some of our laws, we've gotten into this bad habit of just passing stuff, thinking or knowing that, oh, it's missing some stuff. It's like, really, like that's like operating on a patient and it's saying you're supposed to remove their gallbladder. Well, would it be appropriate for the surgeon to only remove half of the gallbladder when he needs to remove all of it? And say, well, I know I'm missing some stuff, but I'm just going to leave it there. And if it becomes septic and or almost kills the patient, then I'll go back in and handle it. See, that kind of thinking doesn't make sense. So when we're passing laws, actually writing and passing laws and implementing laws, we need to view them as, hey, this is what we want because it is what we want. We should not be passing anything haphazardly. And an example of passing something haphazardly, my mouth is dry already, is Obamacare. That law was shoved down our throats. It was so horrible. It's like nobody knew what was in it. And it was just, I don't know, it was probably over 300 pages or something. It was ridiculous how long that law is in terms of what all is in there. And it's like Nancy Pelosi is quoted as saying, well, we need to pass it to know what's in it. She should never be in a position of power or be serving in any kind of governmental civil servant position if that's how she views things. Like, it's their job to know what's in something before they pass it. Like, that's ridiculous. Now, there are things about Obamacare that I do like, but most of it I don't like because it totally ruined the health insurance environment. And it affected our benefits. See, Obamacare, it tried to eliminate private health insurance so that way people would be forced to purchase health care from the government. Which is so stupid because we don't want socialized medicine. I know some people think they want that, but I'm like, you know what? Before you really vote for that, I really think you should go live in the United Kingdom or in Australia, get really ill, get diagnosed with like a chronic illness or something, and see if socialized medicine actually takes care of you. Because it does not. Socialized medicine is great if you never get sick. Socialized medicine is great if all you need is an antibiotic or if you need birth control. But if you need anything more serious than that, you are screwed. You are up a creek without a paddle, as they say. So, needless to say, I am against any kind of legislation that is not complete. And if they're not sure whether or not it's complete, then they need to pass it one phase at a time. I don't mind them doing that, because if you pass it one article or like one amendment at a time or one issue at a time, then at least we know what's in there. And then leave the more difficult stuff, hold off on that till we have more data or research, but at least pass the stuff that you know what's going on. This other stuff, sometimes they just pass stuff and they don't even know what's in it. I'm like, really? And these are our elected officials and our legislators. I mean, it is so dangerous to pass laws and not know what's in it. That's ridiculous. Like, someone had to write it, someone had to put it together. And I mean, hopefully our representatives are literate so they can read. I mean, to me, there's really no excuse not to read this stuff before it's passed. I mean, I would think that that's their job, is to know what's in this stuff before they pass it. But I guess there's a difference in the thinking, because some people, they just want to pass stuff and not pay attention to what's actually in there, but yet it's always putting the American people on the hook for the cost of it, meaning our tax dollars. You see, when you think of cost, you need to look at it from the point of view that that's going to be passed down to somebody. It costs money, and that somebody is you and me. And it's also anyone that's visiting here in the United States, because whenever you're visiting here, you're paying sales tax, you're paying all these different taxes while you're here. You may not be paying income tax and some other taxes, but you cannot escape taxes when you travel anywhere on the face of this earth. So I mean, just look at it this way, you cannot escape taxes, which if you're buying a good or something, you should pay taxes. If you're earning income, you should pay taxes on that. But my point is this, our government collects so much money in tax dollars, but yet it's like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So the way that you prevent shadiness or ignorance is you read the laws and you know what's in there before they're passed. And if something's not right, you don't pass it. You either scrap it altogether or you rewrite it. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, when kids are in school and they're writing essays, they have to do the same thing. Passing a law that the legislators have not even read would be like a student in college writing a paper, but then not reading their paper and just turning it in. Do you really want to take that risk of what kind of grade you're going to get? I mean, that's stupid. Even a college student proofreads their work. But for some stupid reason, we have legislators that, they just think they're so high and mighty and so intelligent and geniuses up there at Washington, D.C., that they don't need to read anything. I'm like, it's the direct opposite. When you are in a position of power and when you are an elected official, it's your job to read all that stuff. Because I would think that as an elected official, you would want to know what's in there. You would want to know. You would not want to take a chance of passing something into law, making it permanent, and then come to find out it's actually really horrible for the environment and or the citizens that live here. I mean, I just think it's bizarre. I mean, to me, that's like buying a health insurance policy, but you don't even know if your doctors are in your network. Or let's say you know that you take certain medications, but yet you purchase a health insurance policy and you don't even know if your medicines are covered. Well, what was the point of purchasing a health insurance policy if you don't know what's covered and what's not covered? And there might be some that say, well, Lesley, I work at a job and I'm a full-time employee and they offer benefits. What they offer is what they offer. I have either one choice or two choices. Well, that may very well be true, but it's still your responsibility to know what's in that policy, because even though your employer is offering you health insurance benefits, you don't have to take them. Although most people do, because they don't want to pay a lot of money for health insurance. So they think it's okay for the employer to pay for all that. And then they complain when the employer offers health insurance that doesn't cover everything under the sun. It's like, well, if you want everything covered under the sun, then why don't you purchase your own health insurance policy? You can do that. I've been doing that for over 10 years now. Because I have yet to find an insurance policy from my employer that covers the things that I want covered. See, I want the best possible insurance. I want to be able to go to any doctor whenever and however I want. I don't want to have to go through a prior authorization mess. I was going to use a different word, but I'm trying to work on my language. I wanted to be in charge of my health insurance policy. Because another thing I don't like about purchasing health insurance through an employer is that they become part of your health care. And it's, there's supposed to be HIPAA laws and regulations about that. But the fact is, the more people you involve in your decisions, the less privacy you have. And one thing I can't stand about purchasing health insurance from employers, it's like, hurry up and sign up, hurry up and sign up. But then if you ask them, hey, I need to see a list of providers, I want to see every doctor that's in this network. And the employer will sometimes ask, well, who do you need to see? I was like, it's not your business. I want to see how large is your network. That doesn't mean I need to see anyone. It means I want to know who's in my network. Because here's the thing. Let's say I live, in a town, but all my doctors are located in a city almost 2 hours away. Would it be beneficial for me to purchase a health insurance policy where the closest doctor for anything is 2 hours away? No. And also, you need to have access to the formulary. The formulary is the list of medications that are covered on your health insurance policy. That's supposed to be freely given to you. The information. I'm not talking about the drugs, but nothing's free. But I'm saying like the pamphlets and the list of medications that are covered or even not covered on your health insurance policy, that's called a list. It's called a formulary list. And as a consumer, and as someone that is signing a contract saying you're going to pay this premium and then they're going to cover these costs, you need to know what's covered and what's not covered. Because there's nothing worse than going to a doctor's office, you think they're covered, and then wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. You have to pay the cash price to see that doctor because you didn't know they weren't covered. And even worse, if they prescribe a drug that's not covered, oh man, you are really, really out of luck on that one. So just be aware of things like that. Just be aware of things like that, because it's important what you purchase and also what is in your health insurance policy. Like, you need to know what's in there. It's the same thing with rules, laws, and regulations. We need to know what are in our laws, because if we don't know what's in there, then first of all, you're not going to know whether or not you're breaking the law, but yet, law enforcement, regardless of which agency it is and what laws you break, unfortunately, they are quick to lock you up and charge you a fine or a fee, and they love putting people in prison. They love locking people up and throwing the key away. Because you'd be surprised how many law enforcement people think that the average person knows all these rules, laws, and regulations when they don't. Most people don't even know what's covered in their health insurance. Most people don't even know if they have life insurance. And then if they do have life insurance, they don't know how much is covered or how much they get if someone passes away. They don't have a clue. So to expect the general public to know all these rules, laws, and regulations and be so harsh with fines and or imprisonment is just ridiculous. And I say that because I'm from Oklahoma. Oklahoma, the states that are in the Bible Belt, in case you don't know, the states in the Bible Belt are very quick to lock people up and throw away the key. They are very quick to arrest people. They are very quick to do things irrationally as opposed to rationally. And it's very unfortunate. I mean, things are getting better for sure. I mean, I haven't heard of any bad cases here lately, but you know, it's not really a compliment when your state is known as having one of the highest incarceration rates in the country. Like, that's really disappointing me, and that tells me that we have a big problem with people not knowing the law. I mean, there are some people that violate the law and they know it and they don't care, but that's actually quite rare. So if anything, you know, it is the responsibility of the citizen to know what the local laws are wherever you live. So just FYI, wherever you live, you need to go to your .gov website for your state or your area and see just what are the laws and regulations of your area, even if it's just about permits or farming or driving or whatever the case may be. Because every state is different, and there are some nutty states out there, even ones that you wouldn't think would be nutty. Sometimes they are nutty, and it's weird. But moving on, a little bit of the history to this. The Federal Insecticide Act, which is known as FIA, of 1910 was the first pesticide legislation enacted. This legislation ensured quality pesticides by protecting farmers and consumers from fraudulent and or adulterated products by manufacturers and distributors. That's good. So this is a good example of where even people from way back in the day, around the turn of the century, they knew what they were doing. They were not ignorant. Like, we are not the only ones to be concerned about the environment and to be concerned about public health. This has been going on for a long time, so this is nothing new. So just FYI, if there's anyone listening that thinks they're a genius because they care about the environment, I have news for you. Number one, you're not a genius. I'm sorry to dethrone you. But number two, you're not the first one to be concerned about the environment, and thank goodness for that. Because people have been caring about the environment and have been caring about people for a long time. A long time. And that's really good, actually. Because that means our ancestors set the framework for what we have today. So that's a good thing. It says, during World War II, there was a marked increase in the pesticide market as wartime research and development produced many chemicals with newly discovered insecticidal properties. Widespread usage of pesticides garnered much public and political support due to the resulting post-war food surplus made possible by higher crop yield from significantly lower pest damage. Synthetic organic insecticide usage increased from 100 million pounds in 1945 to over 300 million pounds by 1950. That is creepy. That means in 5 years, it increased by 200 million. 200 million pounds of insecticide usage was increased. 200 million pounds. That's a big problem. That is such a big problem. So it says Congress passed the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act in 1947 to address some of the shortcomings of the Federal Insecticide Act. Now here's the thing. There were no shortcomings to the Federal Insecticide Act. Things changed. Like, they did not have the same insecticides at the turn of the century as they did in 1945 or 47. So it's not that the Federal Insecticide Act had shortcomings. is that we have new products, we have new innovations, we have new inventions. So it's important to not shame and blame, and it's important to look at the positive. Because, without the Federal Insecticide Act from 1910, we would not have what we have today. So to claim that it's a shortcoming, I think is overstating it, and I think it's not stating it correctly. Because if it was truly a shortcoming, then they would have rewritten that act way back in 1910. But it was not a shortcoming. Things changed. We know that because of research and development. So it goes on to say, Congress enacted major revisions to FIFRA in 1972 with the Federal Environmental Pesticide Control Act, also known as FEPCA, I guess is how you pronounce it, FEPCA. The 1947 law assigned the United States Department of Agriculture responsible for regulating pesticides. Now, that was a big mistake. But then again, the EPA was not around till the 70s, but here's the thing. The Department of Agriculture, they are not known for being very smart or bright. My apologies if you work in that department, but I know from going to schools here in Oklahoma, some of the people that specialize in Department of Agriculture, they're not always the best and the brightest. Some of them are country bumpkins, and they are all for chemicals and just spraying them willy-nilly. It's ridiculous. Like, it was creepy to me. Like, sometimes there are hicks in these departments. And that's really unfortunate because we need people that understand the side effects and the health risk of these chemicals. See, if it was me back then, I would have never assigned this to the Department of Agriculture. Never. Because they're going to be on the side of agriculture. They're not going to be on the side of human life. That's the problem. That's what I've noticed. And we have that issue here in Oklahoma. Like, we have some very stupid, ignorant farmers. We have some very smart ones as well. But for the longest time, every farmer I met was a moron or an idiot and would just spray chemicals like you would not believe. And I'm like, and you wonder why you have cancer. And at a really young age, I'm just like, you exposed yourself to a very dangerous chemical. It's nothing. Yes, it is. It is something. It's not a nothing. But they just snub their nose at stuff. You'd be surprised how cocky and arrogant some farmers can be. Because it's like if they never leave their bubble, then they continue to have a problem with arrogance and pride. It's really weird. So you never put someone in charge of dangerous chemicals that is going to be on the side of wanting to use those chemicals. That's the problem. And I think they realized their mistake with this. It says the 1972 amendment transferred this responsibility to the Environmental Protection Agency, thank goodness, right, and shifted emphasis to protection of the environment and public health. Finally. See, it is so true about the Department of Agriculture here. They were not the people to put in charge of pesticides. Because guess what? They're looking at it as, hey, we want good crops. We want a lot of corn. We want a lot of potatoes or whatever. So they're not going to see anything wrong with using a lot of pesticides. That was the mistake that they made. I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting to use a chemical. I'm not saying that. But you need to practice some due diligence within that because you have responsibility for whatever you contaminate the earth with. But the Department of Agriculture and a lot of farmers, they don't view it in that light. It's really weird. Like, even though I'm not a liberal and I'm not a Democrat, even when I was a teenager, I thought it was odd how stupid some farmers were. Like, I just couldn't believe that they didn't have a basic education, a lot of them. And they would spray horrible things on their property and their land. So if I was aware that a farmer was stupid or just didn't care about public safety, I never went on their property, even if I had a friend that lived there. I didn't go to birthday parties on their property, nothing. I said, I pass. I don't want to be exposed to anything. And also, these farmers were not always very nice to their cattle or their livestock. Some of these farmers were very cruel to their animals because here's how dumb some of them are. A lot of them think that animals don't feel pain. So they think they can do whatever they want to their animals, and if they cry out or yell, it's nothing. They don't feel pain. They're not people. That's how dumb and stupid some of these farmers are. I'm like, wow, do you realize that that is animal cruelty? But they don't see it as animal cruelty because a lot of farmers, let me put it this way. When I was in college, I did meet some cute guys that were raised on farms and they were going to college to learn about land practices or something, I don't know what. And some of them were really cute. But they were so ignorant, I couldn't stand it. And it's not that I'm super educated because I'm not. I would say I have an average education. And outside of college, I educate myself. I continuously read. I love documentaries, things of that nature. So I'm not saying I'm a genius because, I know I'm not a genius. But here's the thing. I was smart enough to recognize that relationship with one of these good-looking farmer guys was not going to work. Because they mistreat animals all the time. They're cruel to them. And there was no way I could be around that or tolerate it. It disgusted me. It was so weird. Oh, and another thing, farmers, they don't view dogs and cats as pets. Therefore, they don't care what happens to them, and they're not going to spend money on them. So if their dog or cat gets hurt and it's on the farm, they just let it shrivel up and die. They just let it scream and holler in pain. They don't take it to the vet like you're supposed to. It's really weird. I was like, wow, so if you get hurt, like if you break your leg on your property, it hurts when it happens to you. And you want to, have an ambulance come pick you up and take you to a fancy hospital. But when one of your animals gets hurt, especially if it's a dog or a cat, they're just throwaways. They're just trash. That's how farmers look at animals. That's how they view them. And I'm not saying that animals are the same as people because they're not. Animals don't have souls. They don't have human rights because they're not human. But, as being good stewards of this earth, it is never appropriate to be cruel to an animal. Never. And if an animal is hurt, you help that animal. And especially if the animal is yours and it's on your property. And I'll give another example on this of how creepy farmers are. I worked at a vet when I was 16 or 17 years old, and it was a veterinarian that handled large animals and then dogs and cats. One of the vets he hired was so horrible. He would rough handle and mishandle cats. It was terrible. He was bad enough with dogs. But you could tell he did not respect small animals. He didn't like them. He was mean to them. He was cruel to them. He didn't care if they were in pain. He roughed them up because he just wanted to handle cows and horses. Because he wanted to be the man's man, as they say. Well, whenever we would have to take our pets there, which eventually we stopped going there because of what a jerk this guy was, he was so horrible to our pets. He would just look at them with disdain, especially our cats. And he would rough them up. Like we could hear our cats screaming with what this guy did to them. And he almost killed one of our cats and didn't care. It was really sad. And we should have sued, but we did not. But I'm just letting you know, if you have a small animal, like a dog or a cat, that's a pet. Do not take them to a veterinarian that handles livestock, that handles large animals, because they would rather be handling heads of cattle and horses than dogs or cats. And when I say heads of cattle, I don't mean like decapitation. That's a word that they use when they talk about cattle. Like how many head of cattle do you have? It means like they're counting it. A lot of these vets, some of them act like they love animals. They're just there for the money, especially the ones that handle large livestock. Because just think how much money they can make off of 300 head of cattle if they have to vaccinate all of them. It's a moneymaker to them. They don't care about your dog or your cat. They don't care about the kitten you just adopted. Like, there is a different mindset with farmers as opposed to everybody else. So, it's a good thing they passed these laws in regards to insecticide and fungicides and things like that, because it's very dangerous to have very ignorant, stupid people have access to chemicals that can hurt the environment and or people and livestock and basically the entire planet. That's why the Department of Agriculture should have never been put in charge of regulating pesticides. Because they're going to be for it. They're going to be for pesticides. And I'm glad they took that responsibility away from them and gave it to the EPA. Because can you imagine how bad it would be today if that control had never been taken away from the Department of Agriculture? Just imagine how many more pesticides we would be having to deal with today if they had been allowed to stay in charge of it. See, a lot of people, they blame the chemical manufacturers. See, that's wrong. Sometimes it's these federal agencies. Very ignorant ones. See, people are quick to blame the private sector for things. They're quick to go after chemical manufacturers, but they don't think to look at government agencies that screw up all the time. Like, it's like what I say, greed is not just in Wall Street. In fact, that's one of the last places I would look for it, because Wall Street is heavily regulated and overly regulated. If you want to look for greed and combat it, you need to look where it's not regulated, where people are not looking. It's the same thing here. Ordinarily, no one would think to look to the Department of Agriculture to check on the usage of pesticides. I would have never thought that. I didn't know that until I read this article. I'm like, who in their right mind would have the Department of Agriculture in charge of that? They're not scientists. They don't study chemicals. Like, it's just, see, that's the stupidity of the federal government, of who they put in charge sometimes. Sometimes the federal government gets it right, but in this case, they completely got it wrong. But it got corrected, almost 20 years later. Unfortunately, it took some time for them to wake up. Hey, this department is not who should be in charge of this. Because the Department of Agriculture, all they're going to do when they are in charge of insecticides and pesticides, they're going to put their stamp of approval on everything and just let anything and everything through the front door. That's a big problem. So it's not just private sector companies that make mistakes like that. It's also the federal government and these agencies. That's why these federal agencies, they also need oversight. Because they need to be held accountable for what they're doing and also for what they're not doing. It goes both ways on that. But let's move on. It says the amendments require the EPA to assess potential risk the pesticides pose to humans, the environment, and wildlife, and weigh these against their benefits, taking action against those for which the risk outweighed the benefits. Can you imagine the Department of Agriculture doing that? No, I cannot. If they're anything like farmers, they'd be like, I don't read that stuff. That's for city slickers. That's for people that wear a suit every day to read that. That's how those people think. And I can speak from experience on this. I'm from Oklahoma. I'm telling you straight up, folks, this is how they operate. It is weird. It is weird. I'm like, wow, these people obviously have never left Oklahoma. They obviously don't know how the rest of the planet operates. It's bizarre. So it says in 1988, Congress amended the pesticide registration provisions requiring re-registration of many pesticides that had been registered before 1984. That's a good thing. As of May 2007, there are 28 listed restricted pesticides of different formulas and mixtures. Any area these pesticides are used or applied is considered a restricted area. Thank goodness, right? Because if you want to know what a farmer thinks, like, oh, this isn't restricted, you just spray it and move on. Like they don't care if they're exposed to something, and they don't care if their livestock is exposed to something. They don't care if their neighbor is exposed to a pesticide or herbicide or whatever. I mean, it's ridiculous. And you need to read, I've mentioned this before, Toxic Drift. It is an excellent book. Way better than Silent Spring. Because it's more based on science. It's not just, if you haven't read Silent Spring, you can read it, but at the same time, it just reads like a Lifetime Movie Network show. I don't like drama. I don't like that. I don't like something that tries to pull on my heartstrings. I'm like, show me the facts. Show me the data. It's black and white, yes and no. Especially when it comes to something like this. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if someone, sprays a bunch of insecticide on their property and yet they don't take protective measures for themselves, of course they're going to be exposed to a cancer-causing agent. Because whatever can kill a bug or a plant can kill you. I mean, I just don't understand the disconnect, especially with some very ignorant people. I don't care if they're farmers or not, but there's a lot of ignorance that people think, oh, well, it just kills bugs. I'm like, oh, really? What do you know about bugs? And I've had conversations with people about this. They're like, what do you mean what I know about bugs? I was like, how does this chemical work that you're using? Tell me. Well, I don't know. You just spray it or sprinkle it. Okay, you're telling me about the application, but you're not telling me what does it do to the bug or to the plant to kill it. And they're just like, I don't know. I was like, well, that's the problem. You should know. You need to know what's being sprayed and used on your property, regardless of whether you just own a little front yard or if you own 1,000 acres. You are responsible for your property. See, what people forget is that a lot of these insecticides, they're usually being sprayed on bugs that are exoskeletal, like beetles and things like that. Like anything that you stomp on and it sounds crunchy. I don't mean to be gross, but typically that means it's exoskeletal, right? Like a cockroach, which I hate those. Like those, yeah, I'm not a fan of cockroaches. They creep me out. But here's the thing. The reason why there are chemicals or pesticides or insecticides that can kill bugs like that is because they're made to destroy the skeleton of the bug and permeate the skeleton and I think nuke its central nervous system, if I'm not mistaken. And I think different chemicals do different things. But here's my point. Whatever can harm a bug's exoskeleton can harm our skeleton on the inside of our body. Because just like that bug, we are a living, breathing thing. Although I'm not a big fan of bugs, but here's the thing. Whatever can kill wildlife or any kind of insect can kill human life. And whenever I say this, they either look at me in shock because the light bulb is coming on. I can see it. It's kind of like their eyes light up and their mouth kind of drops a little bit. I either get that response, I'm like, okay, good. They're waking up to what they've been spraying on their lawn in the city or in the town for X amount of years, and they realize, hey, I've been exposing myself and my neighbor to a really bad chemical. Bugs are not that important. Most bugs do not warrant a poison being sprayed or sprinkled on their property. Most of the time it does not. The other reaction I get is the extreme. Oh, that's nothing. You're just a worrywart. Are you one of them environmentalists? No, actually I'm not. I'm a humanist. I care about people. And when you care about people, you don't go spraying these chemicals like this. Like, if you live in a town and or a city, but specifically a town, I think this happens more in small towns. You'd be surprised how many lawn care companies, they show up, and it's like they take over a neighborhood for business. And they're spraying these lawns with that tacky green dye pesticide or insecticide stuff. And you know what? You can't even go walking down the street because it smells horrible. It's horrible. I'm like, If you can smell a chemical in the air, that means it's getting in your lungs. And if it's getting into your lungs, that means it's getting into your bloodstream. And if it's getting into your bloodstream, that means it's being circulated all throughout your body. That's why this stuff is serious. I'm not saying we shouldn't ever use insecticides or fungicides. I'm not saying we shouldn't ever use them. They do have their place. It's just the overusage. I mean, it's literally overkill. It's ridiculous. I just think, people are just so anti-bug. It's so extreme. I just think, are you really willing to put your life at risk just because you can't stand daffodils or something? Not daffodils, what are those things called? There's this weed that looks yellow or orange in the front yard usually. Whatever, a dandelion, had to think of it for a second. Do you really think it's appropriate to spray a harsh chemical because of a dandelion popped up in your yard? You know what you do? You just pluck it out of your ground. You pluck it out of the ground with its roots. Because guess what? If you pluck it completely out of the ground with its roots, it won't grow back. Because you uprooted it. I mean, that's the simple thing to do and the safer thing to do. But people don't always look at it that way. It's actually quite rare for people to do actual gardening. I think people forget what gardening actually means. It's like they rely on a chemical or a landscaper to spray a bunch of chemicals on their property to get rid of the weeds. I'm like, that's not how you're supposed to get rid of weeds if you're a gardener. If you're truly a gardener, you get out there and you pull up those weeds. There are people that think they are a professional gardener or something, or that they're super talented at gardening just because they went to Lowe's, bought a pretty flower, and put it in a pot. That doesn't make you a gardener. All that means is that you went to Lowe's, bought a pretty flower, and put it in a pot. Gardening means you're out there sweating. Like you're actually working with the dirt. It's just this misconception about stuff. And I'll say this. I am impressed with people that have gardens inside their homes, like when they live in an apartment or something, like in New York or San Francisco. They take a lot of care and time, and they put a lot of thought into what they grow. Because a lot of them are growing herbs or fruits or vegetables for them to have without having to go to the grocery store, because they're trying to avoid pesticides. Those are gardeners, and they may not even have a front yard or a backyard, but they are literally dealing with purchasing soil, putting it in a pot, and they're usually growing stuff from a seed. That takes patience. And plus, here's the thing. When you grow stuff the old-fashioned way, and you do the work yourself, you learn a lot more, and you know a lot more. Like, you become self-reliant. I think that's a lot better than relying on a landscaper to just show up and spray a bunch of chemicals on your lawn once a week or something. And then, maybe your grandkids come over and they're playing in your front lawn without any shoes on. Gee, you're exposing your grandchildren to chemicals. Do you care about that? You'd be surprised how many people don't think about it. And there are people that look at me in shock when I say this stuff, and there are others that they get angry. Like, oh, are you saying I don't care? I'm like, well, I'm not saying you don't care. I'm just saying you're not doing your due diligence. You're not thinking about what you're doing. I think some people innocently don't understand chemicals and the seriousness of it. And others, they just literally don't care. if it's important for a store to let its customers know if there's paint being sprayed and to stay away from a certain area of the store, then aren't we supposed to make people aware, hey, if you come over to my house, don't walk on the front lawn, I just had it sprayed with pesticides. Like, that's the due diligence. Just care about people. Because if you care about people, then you will care about the environment and you will care about people's pets. Like, I mean, all that stuff goes hand in hand. It's just caring about people. It literally is that simple. I wish more people would wake up to that, but I like to keep things simple, so it weeds out the gray area, so things are simple, black and white, yes and no. Because again, I look at it this way. I try and keep things as simple as possible. That way, when something difficult arises, it's not as difficult because I've already handled this other stuff. I've already simplified other areas of my life and other decision-making skills. I've already simplified it, so that way I have the energy and the brain space and the patience to handle this other stuff. It's very important to look at life that way because it will make things so much simpler, especially when passing rules, laws, and regulations. That's why Obamacare and other laws like that were so huge, so massive, and so dense, it's like, how could anybody know what's in there? How could anyone know everything that's in there? They should have passed it one section at a time. I would have respect for that. Because that would show me that they care and that they are doing their due diligence in terms of legislation. And I think that would have impressed the American people if they had passed Obamacare and just simplified it and passed it section by section. That way it would give everybody a chance to know, hey, this is what's coming down the pipeline. But because Obamacare was not passed like that, it was passed as one big giant blob of misery. Like, it was scary. I remember feeling uneasy about that law because it's like, I don't know what's going to happen to my health insurance that I purchased on my own. I don't know if I'm going to have doctors in my network. I don't know if I'm going to have access to medicines that I need. And guess what? I was right. Because of Obamacare, I had less access to doctors and to medicines that I needed. And as Obamacare, there were different parts of it that were enacted. They were phased in. So year after year, a new part of that law was enacted. It's like, well, what are we going to be dealing with this year? It's like, what's the New Year's resolution? Oh, find out what the next hellhole is going to be in regards to Obamacare and it being enacted into our daily lives in America. That's how horrible it was. So if there are people listening to this podcast, which I know there are, in other countries, it was hell on earth having to deal with Obamacare and not knowing what's going to happen with your health care. Because you had a tyrannical government that was systematically trying to take over the health insurance industry and take over all of our hospitals. Have every doctor, every nurse, every medical staff person report to the government. If that's not fascism, I don't know what is. The federal government tried to take over an entire industry. Well, guess what? The Nazis did the same thing when they invaded different countries. They would take over the banks. They would confiscate people's property. I don't know if very many people know this, but the Nazis even, this is so strange, but if you think about how cruel and wicked they were, maybe it's not so strange, but did you know the Nazis even took over the real estate industry? They also took over the hospitality industry. They confiscated hotels and resorts, especially from those that were owned by Jewish people. That is fascism. So whenever a government, I don't care in what country it's in, whenever they try to take over an entire industry, that is very much a red flag. That's very concerning. Because what does any government know about one single industry? That's not its job. It's not the job of any government to be in control of an industry and to take it over. And you know who did that and completely failed? Because it always failed. The Soviet Union did that. The USSR. Now they were communist and very evil communist. But the Communist Party claimed to be against rich people, hated rich people, and they claimed that, all rich people are bad, your boss is bad, the banks are bad, everybody's bad. So you should just give everything to us, and if you're not going to give it to us, we're going to take it over. Well, guess what? The Communist Party took over everything in Russia, in the Soviet Union. They took it all over and they ruined it. They ruined it. And there was so much starvation and disease. It was at an astronomical rate during that time, during the Cold War as well. Because guess what? The government didn't know what it was doing. And here's the thing. Communists claim to hate money, but they don't. They love money. They have a problem with greed. The only reason why they hate rich people and they hate bankers and anyone that has more money than them is because those people have more money than them and they want their money. So what communists do and what fascists also do is they rile up the people. They rile up the people and they get them wound up by talking about, oh, isn't it bad how rich those rich people are? They're just taking your money. They feed off the emotions of poor people and the middle class. And what's interesting is that whenever communists or fascists take over a country or an industry, it annihilates and gets rid of the middle class altogether. Because then all you have are the super rich and the poor. And even then, the super rich become poor. There was massive poverty. Every single time there's fascism and communism, there is a massive amount of starvation, disease, and poverty. But yet, the people in charge of the government, whether it's the communist government or fascist government, they just continuously blame rich people for their actions. Or they blame a certain group. That's what the Nazis did. They blamed the Jews for all the problems of Germany. Like, how could people fall for that lie? But here's the thing. People fell for it because they weren't happy. They wanted to cling on to something that was a promise. How to describe this? They were clinging to a false promise and to a false doctrine that promised to get them out of poverty, and they were willing to throw anyone under the bus, even an entire group of people, an entire race, the Jewish race. They were willing to throw away the lives of millions of people to justify their greed. See, that's the problem with tyrannical governments. See, tyrannical governments, they don't just drop out of the sky. The Nazi Party, I think they got the ball rolling in the early 30s. I mean, you think about how long they were in power, but they didn't take over everything all at once from the beginning. They had to recruit people. They had to convince people that they were right and everybody else was wrong. Let me put it this way. It takes time to indoctrinate people. But once people are indoctrinated, they will fall for anything. That's why you have to be careful what you believe in. And also, you need to be careful what you stand up for. Because sometimes what people defend is reprehensible. When you think about it. You have people that were Nazis and believed in fascism, and they were okay with torturing people. They stood up for that. They didn't stand up against it, they stood up for it. And they thought they were justified and right. I mean, I know that's probably extreme to talk about that, but it's important to say these things because, as I said, tyrannical governments don't just fall out of the sky. They take time to brew. They take time to grow. It takes time for a false doctrine to take over groups of people. It takes time to convince people. So you just have to be careful with things like that. But getting back to this, we're going to talk a little bit about the regulations of this. In regards to the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. Oh, I want to mention something real quick about rodents. Okay, there are several products that I do not agree with in regards to catching mice and rats. I think it's very cruel. It's that sticky tape stuff. I think that is so cruel. I think if you're going to catch a mouse or a rat, you need to do that trap that just like whops them on the head really hard. You know, like where you use a piece of cheese or peanut butter, and it's like a spring trap. You need to put them out of their misery quickly. But that sticky tape glue thing, that is so cruel to do that to them because they can still be alive while they're on that sticky tape and then they're thrown into the garbage alive. I don't like rodents. I don't like them, but to be cruel like that is sick. And there's some people that see no problem with that. And here's another thing. Do not put poison out for rats or mice. Do not do that because there are rats and mice that are eaten by cats, hawks, eagles, snakes, wildlife. Who would have thought? Guess what? Whatever you poison is whatever can be consumed by something else. And guess what? Not only are you killing the rat or the mouse, but you're killing off other wildlife. Like there was this one job I had. This was several years ago. I was working a contract where I was working at this warehouse, and they were. I was handling their data in regards to cars that had been hit by hail damage, like really bad. So I was processing the claims and things like that for all these cars, and they had a mouse problem in the hangar or whatever you want to call it, factory, hangar, warehouse. And so my boss was telling me about it. I was like, well, I have a cat. I was like, I can bring my cat in. She'll catch him. And she goes, oh, that'd be great. And then she proceeds to tell me, yeah, the poison didn't work. I was like, whoa, you've already put poison down? Well, yeah. I was like, then I'm not bringing my cat in. Why not? Because you've put poison down. If my cat catches one of those rats or mice, she could die. I was like, do you realize that? And this girl just looked at me and she goes, oh, I never thought of that. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Well, then she told the guys, I guess she initially told them that I'd bring my cat in, and then she went in there and said, well, she's not going to bring her cat in because we've already put poison down and she doesn't want to take a chance of her cat dying. You won't believe this. The guys that worked at that warehouse got mad at me. Got mad at me because I wouldn't bring my cat in. I'm like, are you kidding me? You've put poison down. Like, see, that's the stupidity of so many people. Now, for all I know, maybe they were cat haters, I don't know, but you know what? Poison is poison. We should not be using it like that. I have such an issue with that. It's so wrong. And here's another thing. Like, there was a neighbor, I may have mentioned this before, because we've talked about the EPA in times past, but I had a neighbor, and she had all these grubs in her front yard. She had all these bugs or whatever. Bugs and grubs. And she hated it. She got so angry. Like, overly angry. Like, agitated. I'm like, what are you so angry about? She goes, well, these grubs, these bugs. I paid my lawn guy to take care of this. I was like, what do you mean take care of it? She goes, spray some chemicals on them. Kill them. I was like, you spray all that out here? I was like, there are kids that play in your yard. You have people that walk their pets. I was like, you're exposing people to chemicals. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. I was like, and another thing, when you are having a lawn guy spray to kill off these bugs, you're also killing the birds. Because she was noticing, and another lady was noticing, we don't have as many birds in our neighborhood like we used to. And we also don't have as many frogs or toads or lizards like we used to. We used to have a really neat neighborhood. It was really pretty. You had natural wildlife. It wasn't crazy. It wasn't like a zoo or anything. But, it was just normal everyday wildlife stuff. Stuff that you would expect in your garden, whatever the case may be. I was like, well, maybe it's because of all the chemicals you've been spraying. Because guess what the birds eat? They eat grubs. They eat insects. Like, everything is food for something else. I was like, why don't you give nature a chance to work? She got angry at me. Like a nut, she got angry at me. And it's like, whoa. Like, she just glared at me. I was just like, wow, you learn a lot about people. But, that's why you gotta be careful about whose house you go over to. Because you may not realize what they have had sprayed on their front lawn, their backyard, and in their house. Because I used to never ask if people spray stuff in their house. Now I do. Because people, they overutilize chemicals. They overutilize insecticide, pesticides, rodenticides, all this stuff. I mean, it's very concerning. So just FYI, there's nothing wrong with asking people, hey, do you spray anything in your house for bugs or rodents or anything? Because if you do, I'm not comfortable coming in your house. There's nothing wrong with saying that. Here's the thing. If anything, you will be helping them to realize they should not be spraying those things in their house. See, I've had cats for years. I love cats. So, being that I typically always have 1 or 2 cats, I never spray stuff or leave chemicals out on the floor or anywhere in my house. I never do that. Because the risk is too great for me and my cat. I don't want to be exposed to that, and I don't want my cat to be exposed to that. You'd be surprised how many people just spray stuff without thinking about it. And it's just like, I roll my eyes so much, I feel like I need Botox. I mean, it's just insane. And, I'm not crazy liberal. I'm not even a registered Democrat. Like, I'm a registered Republican, and I'm concerned about this. I mean, as I've said before in times past, I think there are way too many pesticides. I think there are way too many chemicals being sold over the counter. Like at Lowe's and Home Depot. And again, I love those companies. They're great. But I think there's too much that's readily available to the average everyday consumer. That concerns me greatly. I mean, people, they just love killing stuff. It's weird. It's not just bugs. So I may have already said this story before, I don't remember, but because we've done so many episodes, and that's a good thing to have a lot of work to do, that's great. Here's the thing though, like some of my parents' friends, they had problems with moles in their yard. Several of them had problems with moles. And so they were going to the store and buying chemicals and just injecting it into the ground. And I was like, are they crazy? And my dad's like, yeah, they're crazy. They just kill everything. It's weird. And what is funny is that, we had moles in our yard, or my parents did. They had moles in their yard. And what's funny is that you could tell that there were multiple moles living there in their yard. And there were 3 different mounds or whatever. And so we just kind of made a joke. There's the papa mole, the mama mole, and the baby mole. We just made a joke about it. And we could tell when they had moved their place of residence underneath the ground because, you could see it. You could see a new little mound or whatever. It was so cute. And what people don't know about moles is that they eat grubs. They actually clean up the soil. So what's interesting is that people are putting poisons in the ground to kill the moles, and then they're putting poison on top of the ground, on the soil, to kill grubs. Well, gee, if you just let the mole do its job, you wouldn't have a problem with any kind of bug because this may not be what people want to hear, but this is how moles are, because I looked them up. I was like, oh, I don't know anything about moles. I'm going to look them up. Okay, so what moles do is they dig little tunnels underneath the surface, right? And so when they catch grubs, they bite them, and they inject their saliva into whatever bug they catch, and it temporarily paralyzes them. And then they drag that insect or grub into a corner of their underground house, and they keep them there it's like having a little refrigerator. They keep all their food in one spot. So they catch all these grubs, and they hoard them into a spot underground, and then they eat them. Now, you may have just been extremely grossed out by what I just said, but here's the thing. That's nature. The mole is programmed to do that. It knows already what to do. But you'd be surprised how many people want to interfere with nature all the time. All the time. And then they wonder why they have all these problems with their yard, with bugs or insects or rodents or whatever the case may be. Guess what? If you have a mouse problem, get a cat. There's plenty of them up for adoption. And cats are great. Cats are super smart. They're very loyal. But you have to remember that cats are like people. They can be moody. Nothing wrong with that. I think they're cute. But here's the thing. Why not use nature first? Use what's already naturally available first before you go for the big guns, so to speak. Like, people need to calm down when it comes to poisons. It's very concerning to me, the high rate of poison that people are willing to purchase, spray on their house and spray on their yard. I don't get that. I just think, wow, you're willing to sacrifice your health to get rid of a stupid beetle. I mean, you gotta be kidding me. And then there are people that get angry that there are spiders outside. So they spray for that. Then they get mad that there's all these bugs, so they spray for that. Well, did you know that spiders eat bugs? Spiders are a natural insecticide. Just leave them outside. I mean, of course, you can kill a spider inside, but you know how you kill a spider inside? It's called get a magazine or a newspaper or a flip-flop. And if they're really too quick for you, or if you're really scared of it, spray them with Windex. That's what I do. So then, when you go to pick them up, you squish them with a paper towel, and at the same time you're picking them up with the paper towel, you're also cleaning your floor or the glass on your window with the Windex. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1 special. I learned that. So, just FYI, there's always a way around your situation, and there's always a solution. Like, don't always reach for the chemical. I think that is such a mistake. So, anyway, some information about the regulations in regards to this act. It says, in order to be considered for use, pesticides had to undergo 120 tests with regards to safety and its actual effectiveness. Because of these rigorous tests, only 1 in 139,000 actually made it through to be used in agriculture. Now, isn't that interesting? Let me get a drink of water. Just imagine if the Department of Agriculture was still in charge. Would they have done all those tests? And there probably would have been way more that would have made it through for use in agriculture. Why? Because they have favoritism towards the agricultural industry. That's why sometimes you have to have someone from the outside conduct your test and to show whether or not something is effective or whether or not something is safe. Sometimes people are blinded by their own favoritism, and I don't mean that negatively. It's just sometimes they're just blindsided by what they personally want, even though it may not be safe for the general public. So moving on, it says, in addition to the FIFRA, the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act of 2003 amended the authorized fees for certain products, assessed the process of collecting maintenance fees, and decided on a review process for approving the pesticides. The purpose of this is to ensure a smooth implementation of pesticide rules and regulations to its users. That's actually really smart. I'm just kind of disappointed that they waited till 2003 to do that part of it. But, maybe they were working out some issues or tweaking it. Who knows? But, there's some things that I wish had taken effect earlier because it would have guarded and protected us way sooner in terms of being exposed to these different toxic chemicals. But, we need to look at the plus side of this. There are improvements that are made every day. Some we hear about, some we don't know about. So that's the good thing about this podcast is that we go over things that you will not hear in the news. We go over things that you will not hear in everyday life. We go over things that are not usually on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and the other channels. We go over things that people don't think to talk about, and they may not realize that, hey, this is really important, and people need to be reminded of this because even though the EPA was created in the 70s, there are rules, laws, and regulations that were passed at that time and since then. But, I was born in 84. How would I know about the EPA unless I was told about or unless I researched it? You know what I mean? So it's important that we remind ourselves of the history of things because we want future generations to be aware of what's currently going on and what led up to this moment in time and the reason why we do things we do, how we do them now, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There's a reason for what we do now. So that way it helps people understand, hey, this is why this makes sense. If we need to change something or amend something, let's bring it to the table, let's talk about it. But until that point, people need to have a general education about this stuff. And it's not being talked about, and it needs to be. Let me get a drink of water. Okay, so the next section is briefly about import and export. Now, this is really interesting because it doesn't talk much specifically about other countries, and I wish it did. But two of the biggest polluters on the planet are India and China. So it's very important that the United States be strict about what it imports and exports. Because as I've said in times past, we have problems with China making bad goods and with India making really bad generic drugs that are not safe. So just because we can do business with someone doesn't mean that we should. We need to practice some caution. And we just need to practice some due diligence. Just practice some set standards, policies, and procedures that guard and protect us. That doesn't mean we can't ever do business with someone that's, outside the United States, but it just means that we need to make sure that everything is on the up and up, because if it's not on the up and up, that poses a huge problem for us as a country, especially in regards to public health and safety. That always gets my attention, and it always gets my attention quickly. So let's go ahead and talk about this. It says pesticides intended for import into the United States require a complete notice of arrival, also known as an NOA, through the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Now, in a later podcast, we will go over all these different federal agencies, and some of them are really fascinating. It's really interesting what they do. God bless them. God bless the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They do so much that we don't know about to protect us. It's really interesting. So, hold your horses for that podcast because it's going to be a good one. So it says, if this NOA is not complete, the product would not make it through customs. That's actually quite good. The NOA lists the identity of the product, the amount within the package, the date of arrival, and where it can be inspected. There are also other rules listed below. So there's 5 of them. So number 1, it must comply with standards set with the United States pesticide law. So basically, we're holding them accountable based on what we know and what we do here in the United States. Their laws mean something in their country, but we have our laws here. There's nothing wrong with that. We are supposed to operate that way. So don't feel like you need to shame and blame the United States just for the sake of inclusivism. In fact, you should never shame or blame your homeland. all you should ever do is try and make it better. And it will never get better if all you do is shame and blame. We need to be positive about our country and our future, right? Number 2, the pesticide has to be registered with the EPA, except if it's on the exemption list. Number 3, it cannot be adulterated or violative. I was trying to think of that word. I was thinking volatile. That's not it. It's violative, meaning it violates a federal law or a state law or a customs law, whatever the case may be. Number 4, there must be proper labeling. That's very important. Number 5, the product must have been produced in an EPA-registered establishment that files annually. Pesticides intended for export to other parts of the world do not have a registration requirement under certain conditions. The conditions are as follows. Number 1, the foreign purchaser has to submit a statement to the EPA stating it knows the product is not registered and can't be sold on U.S. soil. Number 2, the pesticide must contain a label that, quote, not registered for use in the United States, end quote. Number 3, the label requirements must be met and the label must contain the English language and the language of the receiving country or countries. That's really smart. Number 4, the pesticide must comply with all FIFRA establishment registration and reporting requirements. That's good. Number 5, it must comply with FIFRA record-keeping requirements. Excellent. I love to see that. Now we're going to talk about registration of pesticide products. Okay. So it says before a company can register its pesticide products with the EPA, it must know what the EPA considers a pesticide under the law. I was going to say a pest. what it considers a pesticide under the law. According to Section 2U of FIFRA, 7 U.S.C. Section 316U, the term pesticide is defined as the following. Number 1, any substance or mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating any pest. Number 2, any substance or mixture of substances intended for use as a plant regulator, defoliant, or I think that's desiccant. I'm not sure what that is, but it's desiccant. And number 3, it says any nitrogen stabilizer. Goes on to say an applicant will have to prove that the pesticide active ingredient, pesticide product, or proposed new use of a registered pesticide will not cause unreasonable adverse effects on human health and the environment. Under Section 408 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, my nasal congestion, Cosmetic Act, also known as FFDCA, the EPA can also regulate the amount of pesticide residues permissible on or in food, feed items by establishing a safe level, meaning there is a reasonable certainty of no harm from the exposure to the residue, whether directly from the consumption of such food or from other non-occupational sources. That concerns me because I was always taught and raised that whatever foods you purchase at the store in regards to fruits and vegetables, you always wash them off. Always. Always, always, always. And there's a reason for that. It goes on to say for food crops, the EPA is required to establish a tolerance level, the maximum safe level of pesticides present on or in the particular food or feed commodity. Isn't that kind of concerning? Now I understand why there are more and more people that only purchase organic fruits and vegetables because they don't want to take a risk of pesticides. I don't blame them. So the next section is just briefly about re-registration of pesticides. So it says a majority of older registered pesticides were required to be re-registered under guidelines set by the amendments in 1972, 1988, and 1996 in order to meet current health and safety standards, labeling requirements, and for risk regulation and moderation. The Food Quality Protection Act, also known as FQPA, amended FIFRA to require all older pesticides to cause no harm to infants, children, and sensitive individuals within reasonable certainty. So here's the thing. I know they mention infants and children and sensitive individuals, but this should go towards all peoples, including adults. See, because what is considered sensitive individuals? See, that's the thing. If it can affect an infant or a child, it can affect an adult. Because we all have bodies, we all have red blood cells, white blood cells, tissues, muscles, bone marrow, like we're exactly the same, we're just a different size. Most of us. So I think that needs to be changed to why not men, women, children, infants, like everybody, cover everybody. See, because here's the thing, if you don't cover everybody, especially in the wording, then you're leaving a loophole. That's the issue. And I've noticed that. Like I used to never pinpoint stuff with this when it comes to talking about, infants and children and, sensitive individuals and things like that. But then when I started realizing, hey, that leaves the rest of us in harm's way. Like, it just made me feel forgotten. I'm just like, wow, so if you're a healthy adult, you don't matter? I mean, I gotta call it like I see it on this. I mean, if we're gonna call a spade and other things, we have to call it here. And here's the other thing. Words matter, especially when it comes to law, whether it's federal law or state law, because you're dealing with legislation. Legislation sets the groundwork for what is permissible and what is not permissible. So basically, based on what this says here, healthy adults are fair game in regards to exposing them to chemicals. That's my issue. Here's the thing. If you're a healthy woman like I am, let's say I get pregnant. If I don't matter, then why would my unborn child matter in regards to this law? Even though I know I matter and my unborn child matters, it's that because healthy women are not included, like healthy adults are not included in this description, it's not protecting future generations. It's not protecting the unborn. And that's a big issue because children do matter. So that's why things like this should be all encompassing. Like we shouldn't be cherry picking, oh, these people matter, these people don't. These people matter, these people don't. That's not being inclusive. That's being exclusive. That's not right. And, in regards to rules, laws, and regulations, especially at the legislative level, we need to work on getting rid of loopholes. Because loopholes cause a huge problem, especially for the consumer. I mean, it really causes an issue there. Because the consumer has every right, regardless of whether they're male or female, healthy or whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter what age they are or what sex they are or where they live. They should know that they are safe. But if healthy adults are excluded from stuff like this, that's a loophole for manufacturers of chemicals. I'm not against manufacturers of chemicals, not by any means, because we do need them. But I'm saying that when you leave a loophole here, you also create another loophole in another spot that you may not know about until it's too late. And then there's a lawsuit because something tragic happened. So if we could work on getting rid of the loopholes, I think it would make things better, my personal opinion. Now, there are fees in order to registering a pesticide or re-registering. The fees range from $50,000 to $150,000, so it's not cheap. It's not cheap to register your product or to re-register it. Next, we're going to talk about regulated non-pesticidal products not requiring registration. And it's called adjuvants. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word, but it's ADJUVANTS. These are chemicals added to enhance the performance or efficacy and or alter the physical properties of the pesticidal agents. More than 200 EPA-registered pesticides recommend specific addition of one or more of these chemicals into the pesticidal mixture to improve overall efficacy. Recognized as other ingredients, the EPA also establishes tolerance levels for these chemicals, but they are not required to be registered. I think that's a mistake. And I'm going to stand up for a second because I need to stretch my legs. I think that's a mistake because I know that when I go shopping, whether for a pesticide or fungicide or herbicide, whatever I need help with, which is very rare that I shop for one. But when I do, I'm always kind of taken aback at the list of other ingredients. I'm like, that's really creepy because it will say 1% of this active ingredient that will be what is killing bugs or whatever, but then it'll say 99% other ingredients. And I'm like, what's that other ingredients? We need to know that as the consumer. We need to know what we are exposing ourselves to, what we are exposing the environment to, and what we are exposing our children and our pets to, and even our neighbors. We need to know what those are. Because if we don't know what they are, then we're pretty ignorant on it, and we don't know what we should or should not be putting on our lawns or exposing ourselves to. So that is an issue with that. And I think it's very unfortunate that the EPA has tolerated that and has allowed it because, sometimes other ingredients can cause allergic reactions in people, especially if you have, like food allergies or sensitivities, or maybe you have an autoimmune disorder. Those other ingredients could greatly inflame that. I mean, that's serious. Okay, so moving on to the enforcement part of this. Let me get a drink of water because the air is very dry here. The weather in Oklahoma went from cold to really hot. It's like, wow, big temperature change. Okay, but that is normal for Oklahoma. We have extreme weather. So, in regards to enforcement of this act, it says, under FIFRA, no individual may sell, use, or distribute a pesticide not registered with the United States EPA, also known as the Environmental Protection Agency. It says, in regards to unlawful acts, it says, here are some examples of unlawful acts. Number 1, distributing, selling, or delivering any unregistered pesticide. Number 2, making any advertising claim about a pesticide not included in the registration statement. Number 3, selling any registered pesticide if its content does not conform to label data. Number 4, falsification of any test-related information or the submission of any false data to support registration. Number 5, selling an adulterated or misbranded pesticide. Number 6, detaching, altering, defacing, or destroying any part of a container or label. Number 7, refusing to keep records or permit authorized EPA inspections. That one gets my attention there because they should have good records and they should be authorized to, the EPA should be authorized to make inspections with stuff like this. Number 8, making a guarantee other than that specified by the label. Number 9, advertising a restricted use pesticide without giving the product classification. Number 10, making a restricted use pesticide available to a non-certified applicator. Number 11, using a pesticide in any manner not consistent with the label. So those are pretty serious. Pretty serious indeed. But think about it, there's a reason why they have those there, probably because someone was doing those things. And also they're trying to cover their bases to keep people safe. Okay, so next we're going to talk about civil penalties. And it's real quick. It says under Section 14A1, commercial applicators, wholesalers, dealers, and retailers may be assessed a civil penalty for not more than $5,000 for each offense. Private applicators would be given a warning for the first offense, and a fine up to $1,000 may be assessed for each subsequent violation. Next, we're going to talk about federal and criminal penalties. Now, these are a little more serious, obviously, because you could possibly do jail time with these puppies. Okay, so it says violated acts are charged as misdemeanors and subject to fines and or imprisonment. A private applicator is subject to $1,000 and or 30 days imprisonment. A commercial applicator is subject to $25,000 and or up to 1 year imprisonment. A manufacturer or producer is subject to $50,000 and or up to 1 year imprisonment. The next section talks about what is called a special review. So FIFRA requires the EPA to continually monitor and update registered pesticides for any new information concerning their safety. Registrants are required to promptly report any new evidence of adverse side effects and to continually conduct studies to aid in risk assessments. That's really good. And here's why. Because if you remember, in one of the previous podcasts we discussed, there were new, how do I describe this? There were new and better laboratory procedures that were invented and utilized in the 70s, way better than what was done in the 50s. So that's why these things are continually reviewed and more research is done, because our testing gets better. Like, we can detect things at smaller amounts and smaller levels, so that way we can have a clearer understanding of should we still continue to use this or maybe put it on the shelf and not use it anymore. So the more sensitive our tests get, the more easily it is to identify adverse health effects. And that's a really good thing to do because we need that. Okay, so the next section, this one was interesting. I didn't even think about this. It's pesticides and endangered species. So it says the Endangered Species Act protects and promotes animal and plant recovery of ones in danger of extinction due to human activity. Under this act, the EPA must also consider the dangers of animals and plants when registering a new pesticide. The pesticide must not harm the listed endangered and threatened animals and inhabitants. To protect the endangered species, with the EPA program, the following was implemented. Number one, sound science is used to assess risk to the listed species. Number two, there is an attempt at finding means to avoid concerns of listed species. Number three, when concerns of the listed species aren't avoidable, they consult with the Fish and Wildlife Services scientists. Now that is awesome, and here's why. We're going to go over different federal agencies, and one of them is the Fish and Wildlife Agency, and also Marine Life. Those are really interesting agencies. I never really understood everything that they did, but they do a lot to protect our environment, like far above and beyond what the EPA does. I'm very impressed with them. Okay, so then number 4, let's see here. Consult usage limitations when the Fish and Wildlife Service express a potential adverse effect on a particular species based on a biological opinion. In order to implement the usage limitations mentioned above, the EPA will, number 1, add a generic label to the pesticide. Number 2, develop bulletins containing habitat location and pesticide use limitations. Number 3, distribute the bulletins containing this information to pesticide users. And number 4, providing a toll-free number for users to contact regarding information in bulletins and how to obtain one. Now here's the thing. These 4 things are awesome. I think they're great. But do you really think people are going to follow those? No. I mean, if you think about the farmers that I discussed previously, they are the last people to think they need to consult with anyone. The only thing they consult with is probably the cigar or the cigarette that's hanging out of their mouth. I mean, it's just like they're above it all. So, those are some great ideas. I just wonder how is that going to be enforceable? Because when you're dealing with people that are not always knowledgeable or as educated, and I don't mean that they're all ignorant or stupid, not by any means, but, it just gets old when dealing with people that don't practice safety and they don't care about safety precautions. That has always bothered me, even when I was younger. Like, for example, if there were guys that I would date, if they lived a way dangerous lifestyle, I didn't date them anymore. Because they would often make fun of me for being too conservative and not taking risk. And I'm like, I don't know what planet you're from, but you're a moron. I was like, what you're doing could kill you. Like, extremely and, very quickly. So, let me put it this way. When people do not value human life, let me put it this way. I've noticed that cocky, arrogant people, they care about their safety, but they don't care about other people's safety because they don't value human life in the way that you think. Just because someone takes really good care of themselves, or cocky or arrogant, or even if they're some stupid farmer that doesn't really take care of his appearance, they're still cocky and arrogant in that they don't care to do what's right. That's what irritated me, especially when I was in my 20s and I'd meet some of these guys. I'm like, I really don't think we should be doing that. Like, they would be willing to break the law. I mean, it was really strange what they would want to do. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. I was like, I don't do that kind of stuff. And I think that what you're doing is really wrong. And so it's like, look, you can make fun of me all day and all night. At the end of the day, you're the one that's probably going to end up in jail, not me. So it's like, we need to practice ethics and safety and have good morals and have good character here. So it's one of those things that, it's good to have rules, laws, and regulations, but if you are relying on consumers to always do the right thing, you're in for a surprise. They don't. And, I would say that most people have good intentions, but here's the thing. People can have good intentions, but if what they're doing causes a health and safety risk, then the good intention goes out the window. That's the thing. Good intentions sound good, but if someone's doing something that's not right, then their good intentions mean nothing to me, because they're doing something that's either not healthy, not safe, immoral, illegal, a danger to, people, the environment, people's pets, whatever the case may be. And you'd be surprised how many people don't see anything wrong with what they do. That has always concerned me. Even when I was a little kid, that concerned me. Because, I think I've said this before, like, there were certain adults I did not trust as a child. Because I was like, there's something off with them, or there's something not right. Like, there's just, I don't want to be around that. Kids are not stupid. They're miniature adults. And if anything, they hear and see everything, because people don't think that kids notice stuff when they do. But needless to say, I'm very glad that they passed the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. I just wish it went a little further. And I'm surprised to hear myself say that, but just based on what I've read and some of the experiences I've had in regards to how people view animal life and plant life and how they view crops and things like that, it's really disturbing to me how they live their life and they think that what they do doesn't affect other people. What's interesting is that, and I'll close with this, what's interesting is that people that live in their bubble and they don't think that what they do affects other people, they are quick to point the finger at drug manufacturers whenever there's like a spill or something. But yet, those very same people don't ever point the finger at themselves, in regards to what they are exposing themselves, their family, or their neighbors to, in regards to chemicals and pesticides and things like that. There are a great many things that start in the home, because it's character building. What's interesting is that the number one type of person that I can't stand to work with is someone that behaves one way at home and then is a totally different person at work. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They're basically living two lifestyles, and they give themselves permission to do that for the sake of the job, for the sake of the money, for the sake of the title that they may or may not have, or for the sake of their position of power within their company or the company that they work for. That comes down to arrogance and cockiness. It's one thing to take pride in yourself and to have pride, and, I don't mean pride in a bad way, but, like, to take pride in your work and to do a good job. Well, if you're cocky and arrogant, the only pride you have is the kind of pride that nobody likes. It's all about me kind of thing. Whereas when you take pride in your work, it means you take pride in that you're doing the right thing, not the wrong thing. And you take pride in the fact that you can help people. There's a difference in that. Like, I can't stand working with people that make it all about them. They're cocky, they're arrogant, and here's the thing. Cocky, arrogant people are some of the most foolish, stupid people I've ever met. Because they will not admit when they make a mistake, and they don't think that anything they do is wrong. And then guess what? It's anybody and everybody that's in their life that has to clean up their mess, because they don't want to clean it up. And they expect other people to clean up after them, to cover for them. Well, I don't cover for other people. I don't do that. I do not do that, and I will not do that. Because I know that the more that someone covers up for someone else, the more you are enabling that bad person to continue what they're doing. That's why whenever I go over to someone's house or I'm getting to know someone, I talk about, hey, if I'm going to be coming over to your house, I need to know if you spray any chemicals or anything like that. Or when is the yard man coming? Because I won't come during that week or that day. And it's not shaming and blaming, it's looking out for my health and safety. And see, here's the thing. Whenever I look out for my health and safety, it encourages others to look out for their health and their safety because a light bulb comes on. It's planting a seed of humanity to realize, hey, you need to take this stuff seriously and not throw away your health just for the sake of having a beautiful, flawless yard that if the lawn man doesn't come for 1 week, oops, a weed popped up. It just feels like people are constantly in competition with each other, and that needs to stop. Like the only time you're in a competition is if you're playing a sport or if the race is on, so to speak. I mean, it's just, if everybody was doing what they were called to do in their life, like what God has on his heart for you, then you will be a lot happier just doing what you're called to do as opposed to just competing with people that, here's the thing, if you're doing what you're called to do, you won't have to compete because you will already be succeeding. You won't feel like it's drudgery. I just see this competition with people all the time, like my yard this, my kids that, my job this, my boss that, my car this, my boat that. It just gets old. And here's the thing, if you're constantly competing with other people, I guarantee you are walking in misery. You're not walking in joy, peace, or happiness. You're constantly being competitive, and I know because I've been there. I've worked in some very competitive jobs, and you know what? I was always miserable. My health took a beating because of it. And I thought, how stupid am I to do that? Because if you don't have your health, you're not going to live very long. That's just a fact. So just realize that you matter, your health matters, and what you want to do with your life matters. And you may be thinking, what does this have to do with the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act? Here's the thing. If you don't care about your health, then you're not going to care about what you're being exposed to. And if you don't care about your health and you don't care about what you're being exposed to, then you're not going to fulfill your destiny in your lifetime. And in fact, your life might be cut short because you didn't care enough about yourself. And I don't mean that harshly. I'm just saying you need to care. It's very important. This isn't a feel-good chicken soup for the soul episode. That's not what this is. This is, hey, we say it like it is, we call it like it is, we call a spade a spade. That's what this is. That's how this podcast rolls, and that's a good thing. Because, I don't do fluff. I tried that in the past, many years ago, and it just felt like nothing was real. Well, guess what? If that's all you live in is Fluffville, then guess what? Nothing is real. It's not sustainable and it's not real. And then once you realize you've been living a lie, or you have been believing in lies and not in the truth, that's kind of a Debbie Downer. And I will say this, the first time I read Toxic Drift, it was upsetting to me. Because then I realized all the stuff I probably knew I had been exposed to, but I just wasn't sure. And I started taking stuff more seriously. Now that doesn't mean I became a liberal nut and thought about shaming and blaming pesticide manufacturers. Not by any means. It's just, you just practice safety precautions, just on an everyday life. And the way you do that is just be careful what you bring into your home, and just be aware of what you're buying. It's almost like when you are cooking a cake and you have a recipe, right? Well, in order to make that cake, you have to buy all the ingredients within that recipe. Otherwise, you're not going to get the cake that you want. So what kind of ingredients are you going to buy to bake this cake? You're probably going to go to the store and buy fresh eggs, fresh baking soda, fresh baking powder, fresh flour, if you don't already have it in your house. But you want the best of the best, right? That just comes naturally to you. Because that's naturally how most people cook, right? It's the same thing when you start to notice things in terms of pesticides and chemicals. It's not a freak out moment. It's just, hey, I'm just going to be a little more knowledgeable. I'm going to be a little more cautious. I'm not going to freak out. I'm not going to worry. I'm just going to, practice some due diligence and just, care more about my life and, let the chips fall where they land. You just need to have a sense of peace about it. I know I've said this before in other podcasts. I don't ever want anyone to hear these podcasts and feel like their blood pressure is up. That's why sometimes when I talk about stuff, I'll say, okay, please do not drink any caffeine or energy supplement drinks right before we talk about what we're going to talk about. Because especially if I know something is serious or concerning, I always try and give a disclaimer because I want to make sure that people are calm and don't drink a bunch of coffee or something unless it's decaf. Which even so, decaf does have a little bit of caffeine in it still, but not as much as regular coffee. But it's one of those things that, what's interesting about doing this podcast is it's also taught me how to be calmer about things. And I'm grateful for that. And plus, it's also an opportunity to share information with people and also encourage people to have a better life. And I think that's great. And it is possible to have a better life even while you're being cautious and just being concerned about stuff, but not in a seriousness kind of way and then, creating a .org website or, just calling up your senator or your congresswoman or whatever and just freaking out over something. Don't do that. Don't do that. First of all, in regards to me, I just take stuff up in prayer and I don't worry about it because I know God will take care of it. But, if, for example, if there is something that I think my senator or congresswoman needs to know, I can easily just write them an email or a letter. I don't have to storm the Capitol, It's just, there are things that you do that do it calmly and politely as much as possible because not only are you doing it for the other person, but you're doing it for you. Because I think what people forget is that whenever we as human beings overreact to things, it is very taxing on our heart, our lungs, our blood vessels, our capillaries, and our central nervous system. Life is already stressful as it is. I don't think we need to make it worse. But we do need to be aware of things. So it's good to be aware of something, but just be calm about it. Because here's the thing. When you're calm about something, you grow in wisdom. I've learned that over the years. I wish I had been a calmer person in my 20s, that's for sure. But it's one of those things, I guess, when you're young, you're really hyper about stuff because you're learning, for the first time a lot of things, and then, you just have way more energy back then. So, but anyway, I will go ahead and end this podcast. But I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out to me. There is a message link or a button on my podcast website, so feel free to ask me any question you like. We will discuss it in the next podcast. But until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.